Chair recognizes the final speaker, the gentleman from Hampton, Representative Cushing, to speak in favor of the committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I've spoken on this issue a few times over the past couple decades, and at the outset, I just want to acknowledge how incredibly complicated and in some ways very painful this whole discussion is. And I want to acknowledge that the reason that we have a discussion about the death penalty in the year 2018 is because people are murdered. And I never forget that. On a June day 30 years ago, Robert and Marie Cushing planted a garden in the backyard of their home on Winnicott Road in Hampton. It was a ritual of the seasons, the same place they had planted a garden for 33 other springtimes, behind the house where they raised their 7 children. Marie was 17 days away from retirement. They were celebrating the birth of a new grandchild, also named Marie, my daughter. Life was good. That evening, while my mother watched the Boston Celtics game on television, there was a knock on the front door, and my dad got up and answered it. My mother watched, and when he opened it, 2 shotgun blasts rang out and turned his chest into hamburger and killed him in front of my mother's eyes. When I went to the Exeter Hospital 45 minutes later, I remember encountering my mother in her just shock. And she had in her purse, she went to get a Kleenex, and she had a packet of seeds. And she just took the seeds and she threw them in the trash and said, "I won't need these anymore." My mother just turned 92 last week, and she never planted another garden again. And though it's been 30 years, that image of my mother throwing those seeds away burns in my brain. And I watched as the ambulance came and took my father's corpse away from the Exeter Hospital to bring it to Concord, to the medical examiner, where it would be photographed and analyzed and dissected for some future legal proceeding. And it was the moment when I realized that, murder is different, death is different, because my father's body was no longer his body. My father's body was a piece of evidence. And I'll tell you, there's nothing that prepares you to be the survivor of a homicide victim. And I went a long time before I thought about what would be done or should be done to the perpetrator. My family was more concerned with what do you do with the empty chair at the kitchen table where my father used to sit. Or what do you do with the emptiness in your heart? And part of this struggle is just to get up and get out of bed in the morning and not get dragged down and let another get claimed by the homicide. It took a while to figure out who my father's murderers who killed my father, and a few days after the killers were arrested, I went to the corner to a grocery store, and I saw an old family friend, and he comes up to me and he says, "Hey, Renny, geez, I hope they fry the bastards. I hope they fry them so that you and your mother and your family can get some peace." And I didn't really know how to respond, because this is a guy who'd known me my whole life. And he'd also known that before my father was murdered, I'd opposed the death penalty. And it's, not because I had a great moral opposition to it. It was just, I was supposed to want to live a life where, people were respected, and it was part of the, it's on the menu of the life values that I have, but I never gave it much thought. And I realized I couldn't respond to him because I didn't know what to say. I know he meant to give me comfort, but it really wasn't that comforting. And I thought about it for a couple of weeks afterwards, and it came to me that, that he had presumed he was offering me an execution as kind of a balm to my pain, because he presumed that's what I would want, because my father had been murdered. And he presumed that because my father had been murdered, I would have changed my position on the death penalty. And I thought about that. And I realized that if that's what happened, if I changed my position on the death penalty because my father was murdered, well, that would only give over more power to the murderer. Because not only would he take my father from me, but he'd take my values. And I think that's it for all of us. If we let killers turn us into killers, then violence and evil triumph. And in a way, like a light went on, because I hadn't really thought about the death penalty in the aftermath of being a survivor homicide victim. But I realized that, if there's a presumption that everybody who had somebody murdered wants the death penalty, what does that say about me? For the past 30 years, I've had conversations with hundreds or thousands, almost over 1,000 people who, like me, have had the unthinkable happen, who've had the most precious thing in the world taken from them by another human being. And I will tell you, some survivors of homicide victims support the death penalty, some oppose the death penalty, some just don't care. But what bothers me about the death penalty, and the previous speaker, my friend from Manchester, alluded to this, is that those who are advocates of this execution solution for victims' pain have a fundamental misunderstanding about what the healing process is, what it's like for a survivor. Because, healing's a process. It's not an event. You don't get better by an execution. And in some ways, my victim-centered opposition to capital punishment comes from seeing people who have kind of been taken by the notion that a ritual killing by public employees of an incapacitated prisoner is somehow going to make things any better. You don't get better from an event. And then talking to people where the execution was always too fast. It never did what you wanted to do, because what the death penalty does not do is the one thing that every survivor of a homicide victim wants, and that's to bring their loved one back. But we can't do that. But what we can do is to try to find, first of all, the truth about what happened for victim survivors. And thankfully, we have a law enforcement cadre in the state of New Hampshire that works diligently for that. We can find justice. We can have courts that will take someone and put them away, incapacitate them, lock them away for the rest of their life. But at the end of the day, what's most important is that we help people to heal. I don't talk about the costs of the death penalty, because I don't think there's not a price on a human life. But I will say that we do make choices about how we serve the needs of victims. And I will tell you, when I look at the millions of dollars that the state is willing to spend in pursuit of putting one person to death, at the same time, there are 119 unsolved homicides in the state of New Hampshire. And I can't help but think that maybe we don't have our priorities straight. Maybe we should be as concerned about the 119 families who are waiting for justice to come as we are about one person who's, granted, their family has great pain, but whose pursuit of this one killing is turning this killer into a rock star. There are a lot of reasons we should oppose the death penalty, and there's a lot of reasons we should support this bill. But at the end of the day, the death penalty is just a failed public policy. For my friends here who don't trust the government to collect taxes or plow snow, I don't understand how you could take that position and still think that we ought to empower the state to take human lives at some time. I think that the death penalty doesn't work for law enforcement. It's not a priority, and it doesn't work for victims' families. So I would just ask everyone here to realize that this is a discussion that's not just about a vote for one day. It's not just about something that's going to be over, but it's about the values that we have as a society. New Hampshire has never been on level of the death penalty. New Hampshire values civil liberties, it values human rights. New Hampshire can live without the death penalty. Please support this bill. Thank you.
Question for the House on the adoption of the committee report about to pass. Representative Silber has requested a roll call. Is that